If you own an A1, an A9, an A7R, an A7 IV, or one of Sony's cinema-oriented Alpha bodies, the next lenses may matter more than another camera upgrade. Wildlife shooters could get new compact long prime options, while wedding, event, and video users may finally get the missing ultra-wide piece of Sony's F2G master lineup. These are the 3 Sony lenses I would watch before buying more E-mount glass. You are watching Alt Buzz Lenses. Subscribe for upcoming lens reports and buying guides that help you know when to buy, and when it may be smarter to wait. At number 3, we have Sony's new compact 400mm telephoto prime. Sony already builds one of the finest long primes in the industry. The FE 400mm F2.8 GM OSS sits in professional bags around the world, trusted for its optics, its autofocus, and the kind of image quality that has never really been the problem. The problem has always been getting it there. A lens like that asks something of the photographer before it ever asks anything of the subject. A bigger bag, a heavier shoulder, a harder conversation with an airline check-in counter. That is where this new project starts to matter. Field testing activity now points toward a prototype roughly 3/4 the physical length of Sony's existing long prime designs. Not a new 400mm lens for the sake of having one, a rethink of what a 400mm lens is allowed to weigh on a person. For a wildlife photographer waiting out first light on a ridge, or a sideline shooter moving fast along a football field, that difference is not cosmetic. It changes which backpack gets packed, whether the lens survives another connecting flight, how long a monopod stays up, and, more than any of that, whether the lens gets brought at all on the days it might not be needed, but ends up mattering most. The final aperture is still unresolved, and so is the weight, the price, and the exact optical construction. There has been discussion that Sony could be leaning on a more compact optical approach, something conceptually close to a phase Fresnel telephoto design, though that part has not been confirmed. The strongest information at this stage concerns the compact physical design itself, rather than the final aperture or retail positioning, and that is exactly how it should be treated until something firmer surfaces. If a professional needs maximum aperture today, the current 400mm GM remains the known, proven answer. But if the real complaint has never been the glass, if it has always been the carrying, this is the project worth watching. The next Sony 400mm may not exist to outperform the current flagship. Its job may simply be to make serious reach easier to bring into the field. Sony's first project attacks the physical burden of 400mm prime ownership. The next one takes the same idea into a focal length, where size becomes an even larger problem. At number 2, we have Sony's new compact 600mm telephoto prime. 600mm lives at the center of the most demanding wildlife work there is. Birds at distance, safari encounters that never wait, field sports played out far beyond the sideline. Sony's FE 600mm F4 GM OSS already answers the optical half of that demand. What it has never fully answered is the physical one. At this focal length, photographers have long accepted the trade without much argument. A large front element, a long barrel, a case built for one lens and nothing else. A monopod that becomes part of the kit rather than an accessory to it. Getting the shot has never been the only challenge. Getting the lens to the location has quietly been its own. Reporting now suggests Sony is testing a substantially shorter 600mm design, not a replacement for the current prime, but a second philosophy sitting somewhere in Sony's existing spread. On one side, the flexible 400 to 800mm f6.3-8 zoom. On the other, the uncompromising 600mm f4 prime. A shorter design could occupy the space between them, though exactly where it lands depends entirely on the aperture Sony ultimately chooses, and that remains the biggest open question of the whole project. Rather than guess at f4, or f5.6, or f6.3, the more useful framing is this. The final aperture will decide whether this becomes a lighter professional prime, a more accessible enthusiast lens, or something that sits deliberately between the two. No exact price, no confirmed launch month, just field testing activity. a compact design direction, and a strategy that suggests Sony is thinking seriously about its wildlife audience beyond raw performance numbers. Because longer lenses do not just get heavier, they get harder to pack, harder to support, harder to travel with, and harder to justify bringing along on the trip where the shot might never come. If Sony can shorten a 600mm prime without stripping away what serious wildlife photographers expect from it, the biggest improvement may never show up on an MTF chart. It may show up in how often the lens actually leaves the shelf. The 600mm project is about making long glass easier to carry. Number 1 changes the opposite end of the system and asks whether f2.8 should still be the ceiling for professional ultra-wide zooms. Before we get to it, if you have been enjoying these deep dives into what Sony might be building next, this is exactly the kind of story this channel exists to tell. Subscribing costs nothing, and it means you will not miss the report when one of these lenses moves from testing to official. At number 1, we have the Sony FE 16-28mm F2 G Master. Sony already has one of the more quietly ambitious lens strategies in the industry, and most of it has gone unnoticed simply because it has arrived one lens at a time. First came the 28-70mm F2 G Master, then the 50-150mm F2 G Master. Two zooms, two very different ranges, one constant. Full aperture held at f2 across the entire zoom, something almost nobody else in the industry has committed to at this level. What has been missing is the wide end. A 16-28mm f2 G Master would not just fill a gap, it would complete something Sony appears to have been building in plain sight for years. 16-28, 28-70, 50-150. One continuous stretch of focal length, from ultra-wide to telephoto, all of it held open at f2. This is not a story about a missing focal length. Sony already covers 16-35mm with its excellent F2.8 G Master Mark II. So the new lens is not solving absence, it is solving light. And that creates one of the cleanest buying decisions in Sony's entire catalog. The 16-35 gives you more range, more flexibility as a single travel lens. One tool for almost any situation. The 16-28 gives you one full stop more light and noticeably stronger subject separation, at the cost of that final 7mm at the long end. Neither one makes the other obsolete. They simply serve different photographers on different nights. And there are more of those photographers than you might expect. Astrophotographers who currently reach for primes at f1.4 or f1.8 the moment the sun goes down would gain something rare. Ultra-wide framing flexibility with meaningfully more light than f2.8 allows, and fewer lens changes once it is dark and cold, and every extra minute matters. Wedding and event photographers could move through a single evening, a dance floor, a dim venue interior, a tight hallway portrait, a wide establishing shot as the lights go low, without ever leaving f2 and without carrying 3 primes to do it. And for Sony's hybrid shooters, the FX3 and FX6 users, the A1 owners pulling double duty between stills and motion, a constant f2 ultra-wide zoom on a gimbal in a dim interior, is the kind of tool that changes what a one-person crew can actually deliver. None of this comes without a trade-off, and it is worth naming plainly: 28mm instead of 35. For travel work, documentary shooting, or anyone who wants one wide lens and no lens changes at all, the 16-35 remains the simpler, safer choice. The 16-28 is not being built to replace it, it is being built as a faster professional specialist, a lens for the photographer who has already decided that one stop of light matters more than 7mm of range. On pricing, the only responsible position is a general one. A constant F2 G Master ultra-wide should be expected to sit in premium territory, above the conventional F2.8 wide zooms already on the market. On timing, earlier reporting pointed toward a 2026 launch window, though some of that timing has already shifted, so the safest current framing is a release somewhere within the 2026 to 2027 cycle. If sharper information lands before this is finalized, that is the number worth trusting over anything said here today. This is why it sits at number 1. The 400mm and 600mm projects could make two existing telephoto categories easier to live with. The 16-28 potentially completes an entirely new way to build a professional Sony kit. 16mm all the way to 153 zooms, one constant aperture, and a photographer who never has to think about light again between them. There is also quiet discussion around a possible 200mm F2 G master, though the information around that lens is not yet strong enough to place it alongside these three. Worth knowing about, not yet worth building a decision around. So here is the real question. Which of these three would actually change your next purchase? And if Sony does bring the 16-28 F2 to market, would you choose it over the 16-35 F2.8, or would you keep the range and let the extra stop go? Tell me below, I read every one of these. For more upcoming lens reports across Sony, Canon, Nikon, Leica, and the rest of the industry, subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses. Some lenses arrive quietly. The ones worth watching never do.